I just hit record, and you're recording.
Alrighty, so I am excited. So I'm going to start with a little spiel. You are listening to KPCA LP in Petaluma, California, 103.3 FM. And so I'm really excited to offer the opportunity for local candidates to speak about the issues facing Petaluma. So you can see the full schedule at kpca.fm. We have programmers also interviewing candidates as well as school board candidates. So what is expressed here does not reflect the opinions of KPCA or PCA, its staff or members. The second half of the show will be questions that have been submitted or asked in other ones, so you are actually watching this pre-recorded. So if you do have questions after the show, you can contact the candidate or myself if you have a question for me, but please direct the candidate questions directly to them. And in addition, the videos will be put up on my website with the candidate contact if you don't have that, and the website's www.domenica.ninja. And of course you can ask questions on this Facebook video when it's posted. I'll make sure that it gets to the candidate. I'll alert them of the question on the Facebook. So let me skip down because it's not live. So I'd like to stick to questions that have to do with issues that are facing Petaluma and stay away from questions regarding political affiliation, voter history, and the like. And so this goes for also after the fact. Of course, if you want to reach out to the candidate individually, that's totally up to you what you ask. But we have been trying to stay away from that in these interviews. So I'm going to start by letting our candidate that's here today introduce himself.
Hi, Domenica. My name's Dennis Pocekay. I'm a candidate for Petaluma City Council. First time that I'm running.
All right, do you want to give any more of an introduction about yourself? Tell us a little bit about.
Sure. I've lived in Petaluma with my wife and two children for 27 years. My children are grown and gone now, but we'll come back to that later. My history in Petaluma, though, goes a little further back than that. I grew up in Richmond, California, and when I was growing up, my grandfather worked for the Ford Motor Company in Richmond, and they closed that plant and moved to San Jose. And so my grandfather and grandmother moved to San Jose, and all the grandchildren were still in Richmond, so they'd have us all down for 2 weeks every summer when we were in elementary school. And my brother, who's 2 years younger than I, and my cousin 1 year younger than I, the three oldest boys, we would certainly get to fighting, wrestling, and kind of looking like, they showed a bunch of kids fighting in the comic strips. My grandmother would come storming in and she'd say, "Stop it! If you kids don't stop it, I'm going to ship you all to Petaluma." And I like this story because that shows how big the world was in those days. Petaluma was the edge of the earth for Richmond. And that was as far as anyone went. The only reason anyone went that far from Richmond was to take my grandmother up to Petaluma to buy chicks, because she liked to raise chickens and eat her own chickens. And so every 6 months, someone had to take her on the ferry to Marin County, up Highway 101 to Petaluma to buy her chicks. That relaxes me, if not you or my general audiences. Beyond that, I'm a retired physician. I worked at Kaiser for most of 30 years. I worked 10 years as a primary care physician in general internal medicine in Santa Rosa. I left at that point to do some additional training in occupational and environmental medicine, and didn't think I'd come back to Kaiser, but and that's a different story for a different time, I think, but ended up back at Kaiser and spent the better part of 10 years in San Rafael as head of the occupational and environmental medicine department, and then when we had enough business up in Petaluma, I did the last 10 years in Petaluma. I think that's enough, unless that leads you to have other questions.
Not yet. We'll start with these questions, and then we'll move on. And I should remind people that the first questions were set questions that were submitted to the candidates before they were here. So all the candidates are getting asked the same questions initially. So here we go. What policies, strategies, or the like do you propose to manage the rapid growth in Petaluma while preserving the small town and historic charm? And I am, for these purposes, identifying rapid as the last 15 to 20 years.
Yeah. You know, in the greater scheme of things, I'm not sure I would say Petaluma has had rapid growth. I mean, so for some periods it does. For 2 or 3 years, it seems like it has some rapid growth, and then it slows down for a while, and the council gets accused of being a no-growth council at times. So I sort of see it as being that it's been a little moderate growth, more moderate growth on average in Petaluma. But that is a big issue of mine, and the issue relates to what kind of housing we build. And I'm a big advocate for affordable housing. I feel like that everyone says we have an affordable housing crisis. And in fact, people are leaving Petaluma every day. Families are leaving Petaluma every day. If I knock on 50 to 100 doors a day during my campaign, I find someone who's moving this week or next month. And it's because the prices and the ability to purchase a house or pay rent here is becoming more and more difficult. My own mini goal in this regard is to have 2 people who work full-time for minimum wage be able to find a roof. I think right now, 2 people in that situation can't find a roof. Excuse me, I just need a drink. So affordable housing is big for me, and I'll try to stay on your question though. In terms of growth in Petaluma, let's come back to the growth issue. I believe I favor a moderate growth for Petaluma. I certainly think that we should meet the suggestions or recommendations of the ABAG group, the Association of Bay Area Governments, and the number of new units that they would like us to build as our share of the people we know are coming to the San Francisco Bay Area. But if you look at the last ABAG recommendations from 4 years ago, we've built over 75%, 80% of the market rate units that they suggested we build. We build only 10 to 15% of the affordable units that were suggested. So I think over this next 4-year period, I'd like to see us continue what I would call a moderate growth level, but really have a goal. It's going to be difficult, but to have a goal for 50% of the units built to be affordable units or workforce units or whatever we tend to refer to them as, meaning for folks with low incomes, very low incomes, and moderate incomes. In terms of, again, then, the our Petaluma of the future, I think you were looking out 7 to 8 years, and I just went 3 or 4. What I look at is that we need to build many of these units higher and smaller and denser and near transit in order to meet all these criteria. And in fact, I think that's when people tell me, when I'm going door to door and people say, I want Petaluma to stay the way it's always been. I think I had heard you say that earlier, sort of. And when they say that and I think about it, what do people like about Petaluma? They, as you say, it seems smaller than it actually is, I believe. And people like the intermingling of people from all walks of life. We're small enough that people from all walks of life still mingle. Our downtown is kind of eclectic or funky or whatever word you want to use. It is a little different. People like to visit. But, in order to keep this intermingling of people of different lifestyles and incomes, we have to have some housing at the low end. And I think that the biggest key to keeping Petaluma special, if you will, is more choices in housing, especially at the low end, and more choices in transportation. We have to upgrade our public transit system and get more people on bikes, I feel, in order to deal with our traffic problem.
Okay, so you covered a few issues there, but what additional issue that's not addressed above is high issue or issues that's not addressed above if you're elected into office?
So one for me is transparency. I believe a lot in personal transparency and government transparency. I believe that as I read the state laws in this regard and see what the city council does, and even talk to some seated city council members who can't actually tell me what goes on in closed session, I feel like a little too much goes on in closed session. the way I read the rules, not everything that may be discussed in closed session must be discussed in closed session. City Council has some leeway to make more of this, more of their decisions more open to the community. And I think we should try to move in that direction. It's hard to say how much until I see what's going on in closed session, but I've had enough of little bits of nodding from current councilmen that makes me think we can move in that direction. In particular, the discussions have already started on what to do with the fairgrounds in 5 years when the lease is up. And I don't understand, and I haven't talked to anyone that, of course, the folks that are at those meetings can't talk about them, but I can't find anyone else who's running for council or otherwise who really knows what's going on in those meetings or knows why they have to be closed at this point.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
You asked me for 3 things initially. I went to the housing, now I went to transparency. Can I go to one more?
Sure.
I'd like to talk about traffic and Rainier. I support Rainier. The city voted for that over 10 years ago, maybe 15 now, and I do think that that will help our traffic problems. But when I look at all the paperwork surrounding it, it appears to me, and I haven't had anyone disagree vociferously with me, that it's at least 8 years away. If everything goes perfectly, it's 8 years away. And I think people are demanding relief sooner than that. And in that regard, I think we have to relook at some issues we've looked at over and over again. For example, improving our public transit system, and perhaps also marketing it better so that more people use it, meaning our bus system. I've been riding the bus because I hadn't ridden it much in the past, and I wanted to be able to talk about it. And I think from my standpoint, it works pretty well. Certainly, some bus drivers are friendlier than others, but that's true anywhere you go. So I think we can improve and market our bus system. I also think we need to do what we can to incentivize employers and people to get on bicycles, to get on bicycles. I think that, I'm not talking, my wife is never going to ride a bicycle. She's already told me that. I have many friends my age who are not going to ride a bicycle. And I'm not saying that everyone needs to ride a bicycle. If we could get 10 or 15% of people on bicycles, it would help our traffic issues a lot. And in that regard, I've been trying to ride my bike into town, where now I live at the far west end of town. And it's very easy to just come down B Street all the way to town. It's a little tougher to get home up the hill. But it's very easy from the west side. Maybe we'll come back to this when we talk about east and west issues. It's a lot harder to get to our central downtown from the east side, either by car or by bike. But in any case, when I'm going just to downtown, no issue. If I'm trying to get across town with one of my mentees from Mentor Me, I look at where we're going a lot more closely, because I know there are going to be spots that I feel I'm worried about taking a junior high student with me across town, because I don't feel our bike trails are totally safe in terms of where they go and how they cross traffic. So the bikes and the bus system are part of the solution to traffic. And I think carpools, we don't talk about carpools much anymore, but I think that we need to start talking about them, even like for people in a neighborhood 2 miles from town, going to town together and trying to get people to commute into town. Honestly, I would think about things like keeping parking free if you have 3 people in a car, but starting to charge for parking in some way, shape, or form if you don't have 3 people. We need to start to fight both our climate change problem and our local traffic problem in that way.
Okay, so if you are elected into office, there will be general plan update planning that will be going on. So, and you kind of alluded to this earlier about seeing Petaluma in the future, but given these general plan updates, where do you see Petaluma in 10 to 15 years? Really 20 is what it covers.
Yeah. I can't talk about updating the general plan without talking about all that's in the general plan that we haven't done or haven't even moved on. I guess I do things backwards at times, But when I first started to run, I decided to research bicycle issues because I thought that was going to have to be part of our traffic solution. And I came up with a variety of things we should try to do relative to bicycles, such as improve and make more safe our bicycle trails, to complete our bicycle trails, etc. And then later found when I went to the general plan that all these things are already in the general plan. And this is true for many of the pedestrian issues as well. And so we need to, I think it's important that the new city council, whatever, that's a bad word, it's not going to be entirely new, but when the new council is seated, I think we have to look at how we can better stick with our general plan. I get the feeling when I go to council meetings that council is very susceptible to the phrase given by developers, it doesn't pencil out this way, so we're striking out the bike trail. And I would like to perhaps look a little further. Not that I don't want that I don't like to keep business local, but for example, let me just go here. Our developers, when I've been at council meetings, talk about penciling out, including 12% profit. I just met a young architect who moved to Petaluma last year from Seattle, and he was very interested to hear me say that because he says in Seattle they talk about 6% profit, and they seem happy with that. So I'm not, I don't claim to know exactly where these numbers come from, but when people are giving different numbers to make something pencil out, if you will, it makes me wonder, whether we're being treated fairly by people who give such a big difference in number. I think I got off your question there. Redirect me if I'm off. Oh, you're talking about 20 years out. Yeah, correct.
Well, yeah, you touched on talking about what's in it now, because I don't think a lot of people know, so.
Yeah, so I would like to see us have a river walk, completed river walk around town. I think, again, that plan was first produced over 10 years ago, and we haven't made much progress. I'm hopeful in that regard. In terms of the Riverwalk, I know the Downtown Association, Petaluma Pete, we're just involved in a fundraiser for that, and I haven't heard how much that generated. But what I find when I'm talking to folks who would seem to have, as I put it, plenty and then some money-wise, folks that had some money to give to something that they wanted, that I find people very interested in contributing private funds to completing a downtown Riverwalk. I think we seem to have let go of the idea of having a trolley car around this Riverwalk as well, and I'm not wed to that, but I think one way or another it would be good to complete the Riverwalk. I think it would be good. I think the Petaluma River is in better shape than it was before we ever had a general plan, but I think it can still be in better shape. I think the dredging is going to be important. I think that's, from my standpoint, it's most important for flood control, but also I like to canoe and kayak on the river, and I get concerned at times that pretty soon at low tide it'll be totally unnavigable by canoe and kayak. So I think the river is an important part of our history, and I think well, we mentioned the dredging. I've heard some good news recently, no details, but good news about the last trip around the river between Jared Huffman and the Army Corps of Engineers and Mayor Glass, and it seems like people are upbeat about that leading to at least one redredging.
Okay, so just as before we get into the other questions, is there any additional information before we dive in you'd like to touch on?
Gosh, no, I'll let you direct me at least to start with.
Okay, sounds good. So you talked about the east-west divide, and some people believe that it's not a thing. Some people believe it is a thing. Being in public health, people are much more unhealthy in certain census tracts in the east side versus the west side. And I use the example in all my shows that the census tract that I grew up in is not one of the poorest and most unhealthy. And now I live on the west side, and it's very different, with Cherry Valley, I think, having the highest life expectancy, which indicates health. So do you want to comment on that?
Sure. I've made a big part of my campaign, being a physician, a retired physician, saying that I wanted to do things to make Petaluma healthier. And I think this can be done in big ways, as some of which we've talked about, such as housing that's more accessible, and also small ways. Let's see. When I'm at Davis, where I'm teaching at UC Davis, I teach undergraduate Introduction to Public Health, and one of my mantras there that I've developed, I don't think I'm the first person to ever think about it, but I haven't read it in print, is that every vote you make and every decision a governmental body makes is life and death to someone. If you're talking about $100,000 to go to homelessness or to go to more EMTs in the fire department. If you have more EMTs, you probably will, maybe not every year, but over time, save a life or two by doing that. Whereas, on the other hand, if the money goes to correction of our homeless problem, you're going to save lives that way too. We know that people who are homeless have a much higher chance of dying, whether it's tonight, in the next week, the next month, the next year, the next 10 years. And the police department had a coffee with the cops this last week, and I had the pleasure of being the only citizen there to talk with 5 police officers, so I had a good talk with them for an hour at the Starbucks on the east side, and they certainly confirmed that point of view, that every decision we make has something to do with life and death for someone. And so I think it's important to keep that in mind when you're making these decisions, and that I know you didn't mean this, but I don't think every census tract on the east side is unhealthy, and I'd be surprised. I haven't looked at that recently. I know that the if you will, the socioeconomically highest census tracts, I think, are still on the west side, but I think some are pretty high up there on the east side as well, and that just shows that it can vary quickly from census tract to census tract, and we know that. And I come from a social justice background. I mean, I didn't list that in earlier, but if I could take a minute to go back to that now. When I retired from Kaiser 9 years ago, I think my first thought was that I wanted to teach. Way back when it didn't look like I'd get into medical school, my plan B was to teach high school math and physics. I'd actually talked my way into teaching at a private high school in LA if I didn't get into medical school. I asked them for one more week, and I got into medical school off a waiting list, and so I'd come very close to teaching in the past, and of course I've done some teaching at Kaiser as well, but I substitute taught at Casa Grande, did some long-term substitutions in biology and anatomy and physiology, and at the same time began teaching at UC Davis, and so that the teaching was one fork in my road that I wanted to go back to. But then I also wanted to do more volunteer work, and I became board chair at Mentor Me, which is kind of our local big brothers and big sisters, and I started working with some immigrant rights groups, having North Bay Organizing Project, and what we now call the North Bay Rapid Response Network, and teaching folks their rights if they are met by Immigration and Customs Enforcement. And also we've had spent a lot of time helping a Haitian family that wasn't subject to Immigration and Customs Enforcement. They came to the U.S. applying for asylum because of fear for their safety in Haiti, and we've been helping them try to get settled here. And again, you run into this housing problem where this is a family of 5 that was able recently to get into a 2-bedroom apartment here. They're getting some rent help that tapers over about 6 months. They have to, despite the fact they already have 5 of them in 2 bedrooms, they have to have another roommate. Hopefully someone perhaps who's on Social Security who can pay a third of the rent and take one of the bedrooms, and they'll be that much more squeezed. Anyway, so I was there in social justice, and I came there. I came back to this subject because where our discussion was going and these census tract differences, and I think what we all know is that the pollution and chemical exposures follow the people who are poor to start with. In large part, probably because they have less resources to fight it. And so there's less NIMBY, less not in my neighborhood when you talk about putting things there. And I won't go any further with that right now unless you push me.
Yeah, I just want to say I by no means meant that all the census tracts on the east side are the same or in the city, because that would be too much of a generalization. And I, in fact, went from the census tract I had previously mentioned, that's one of the poorest in the city, and then went and moved next to JC and now live on the west side. So I've seen kind of a full spectrum.
Oh yeah, and if I could come back to the east side, west side, because you asked about that too, and I get off in different directions. If I could come back to that for a moment. On different days, some days the east side, west side divide seems quite severe to me, and other days it doesn't. I have to say I wasn't aware of this until I started running for office and just reading more about the city. But recently, I believe it's the Visitors Bureau came out with this new map that separates Petaluma into 8 neighborhoods. Have you seen that map?
Yes, I have.
I don't think those are bad choices for names, and I don't think that's going to solve the east side west side divide, but I think it helps a little bit perhaps if we talk about 8 neighborhoods rather than 2 sides of town. That's minor, but I just like to mention that because I think only maybe they could divide just the western, which is still east-west. If we keep western area on the west side, if we could divide that and give it 2 different names that didn't have west in it, maybe that would even be better. But I think the council has to make an effort to and this brings me back to I've been asked questions since I've been running about diversity. Okay, and usually the talk is about racial diversity or socioeconomic diversity, but I think east-west diversity is equally important to be considered by the council in everything we do. I mean, I think that diversity it's easy to talk about diversity, and it's a lot harder because I think people have thought about diversity in this city, and yet we don't have much diversity in the council, in the city employees, and in our city commissions, except for the youth commission. That's kind of interesting to me too. I spent a couple of years on the youth commission, and certainly even when I did that like 6-8 years ago, maybe it was 4 to 6 years ago, we had no problem getting a diverse student group, but the adults were something else. So I think the city. The city has to, everyone in the cities, and especially at the top levels, at the city government level, has to see diversity as important, and it has to be part of the vision for the city of being a diverse place, and then the leaders have to lead and model their push for diversity, and they have to include not just racial diversity, not just socioeconomic diversity, not just east-west diversity, but don't forget the LGBTQ community. Don't forget I don't know what the best word to use is these days, our differently abled community, okay? I mean, we get back then, so now I brought ADA into my thought, the American with Disabilities Act, and I think, again, I think we've done a pretty good job of living up to the letter of the ADA, but I don't think we've totally lived up to the spirit of the ADA. I was taken around town by a disabled constituent, if I'm elected, a disabled resident by bus with her wheelchair to show me, and I knew that I had noticed these things myself, but I didn't notice how common they were. The situation where if this is a curb and there's a cutout in the curb for a wheelchair to go up, okay? But then you got to go left or right, and to the left is a telephone pole, and to the right is a stoplight. Wheelchair can't get by each way. I mean, I had noticed those before, but when she took me around, it seemed like almost 1 in 4 of our cutouts, I mean, not the ones, of course, in a residential neighborhood, but in the downtown area or even in the east side downtown near, say, Kmart, 1 in 4 of those seem to end in a dead end, if you will. And so, again, I think it's important for the city council to model and set the bar for being sure that anyone involved in choosing people or hiring people is aware that we have, not just us, every city has a lot of institutional racism and classism that needs to be addressed, and that this applies even to East Siders and West Siders. I think that's something we could do, is insist that city commissions, for example, the council appoints equal numbers of East and West Siders. Some things, there may be some issue where it makes sense to have all East Siders or all West Siders on a specific issue that's at a far edge of town, for example. But if both sides are interested, they should be represented equally.
So again, you're listening to State of the Union with DG the 30-something. I'm here with Dr. Dennis Pocekay, who is running for Petaluma City Council. And so my next question is, well, I was going to make a comment saying that I don't think our city is involved enough in public health. It's seen as a bigger issue, so I'll be advocating for that. But we don't need to belabor that point. So we just talked about the East-West divide, and I think you started talking about getting equal representation. So this is kind of a two-tiered question in an effort to consolidate, but I see that there's two issues in my life that our city website, our social media has gotten a lot better, but our city website is very antiquated. It's not easily viewed on your phone, which is a big issue. We do have a mobile app, which is great because it offers certain things. Given that information, though, is how do we get people involved, especially younger people involved in city government? And maybe it's just the committees and commissions, because it is a huge time commitment and it could be very difficult for people who work full time. So how do we get them represented, involved? You know, how does that look?
So I will admit to being old enough that I'm not your most social media savvy person. If I have an issue, I call my son or my daughter, and they can usually solve it for me and save me waiting an hour online with somebody at Apple or some other place. But I do know that these things are important. They're important to me, increasingly important even to me as someone who doesn't use them as much as younger folks. And certainly that's why in my campaign, really I wanted to make sure I had 2 social media people on hand the same day I had a campaign manager on hand. And I've been very happy with their work in that regard. And I think our website and our Facebook page are competitive at the very least with others. And I appreciate all the work they've done, and I value it. And I think that certainly I can't say anything in defense of the city's website. You know, it seems like that seems antiquated to me, and I'm antiquated, you know, at least by age. What was the second part of this question?
Just getting younger people involved. I just focus on younger people.
Yeah, and you know, this again, I'm going to come back to this issue that, you know, people have too busy a life for the most part, you know, and Petaluma is in too good a shape, as bad as we talk about during the election, it's in too good a shape to begin with for younger people to feel they, you know, have the necessity of getting involved in city government. That's what I feel. And I say that because I only decided to run when I talked to a lot of younger people who I would have liked to see get involved in a run, but they could not because of job, family, children, and it's only when I didn't think that I could get a younger person that I thought would be good to run that I decided to run. And so again, I thought it was important to have a good social media presence and to try to understand what's going on here. But it's not easy. I intend to have I promised several constituents already that if I am elected, I promise to have an afternoon, at least one afternoon a week, where I schedule appointments on the hour and have walk-ins on the half hour. And I'd go to 2 afternoons a week easily. To go more than that might be difficult with other city responsibilities, but I'd like to have a lot of contact with people, and I would move the contact point around from east to west. And I've even promised, and I will fulfill this promise of, if I'm elected, to have more sessions on the east side than on the west side. I think that is important, both in the east side west side divide and in influencing younger people. But then you get to, well, where are you going to have them? If you just have them at Lucchese on the east side, that's not much different than having them at the city council chamber. Certainly they can be held at restaurants and stuff, but you won't have as many seats. You know, when you have an issue that's really contentious, when we use all, I forget how many seats, 200 seats in the council chamber, and have another 200 people spilling out into the hallway, it's not easy to move that amount of people to a different spot. But I do think, I will just say I agree with you that we need to make efforts in that regard. I think the website can be some of that effort. Moving the, again, I think we have to be very, very careful with where we move meetings to, depending on how many people are expected. And in fact, we may move one somewhere and find there are a lot of people there that are interested when they don't have to travel far to the meeting.
Okay, so this may not be a direct parallel, but it's a parallel for me. I was on the tech committee for a while, and the constant answer about the website is that there was no money. And during this interviewing process, where I learned a lot too, is that the constant commentary is that we live in a poor city, and that makes absolutely no sense to me, especially as a business owner. And so, you know, budgetarily, again, the budget's huge, it addresses a lot of issues, but first off, why are we a poor city? Again, I don't think that's an easy answer, and
Right.
If that's true, then how in the future do we deal with these budgetary limitations?
So, you know, I've been through the city budget, the one we're currently living under, twice, going through the whole book as slowly as I could stand. And I'm certain that, you know, this is not an expenditure problem. This is not like we have someone ordering $50,000 desk sets, you know, for their office. Okay, this is a revenue problem. And we just don't have enough revenue. City services have been cut to the bone. City offices are all closed on Friday. Police and fire are working overtime because they have positions they can't fill, even though the numbers have been cut. We see this just everywhere, and I agree with you. Almost every city council meeting I go to, something gets asked that seems on the surface of it to have nothing to do with our financial situation. For example, a just cause eviction ordinance, okay? And basically what it boiled down to, the way, and I couldn't make it to the final meeting, I'd been to an earlier meeting, but the way when I've looked at the tape of that meeting as well as heard follow-up about it, is that, you know, the answer was given as it's been often given at meetings that I've attended, that even though this ordinance you're asking for doesn't cost anything, someone will sue us over it, and that'll be our last straw to bankruptcy. I mean, that's the impression I get, that the city is afraid to do lots of things because of getting sued. And certainly the committee, the council and the city have gotten sued. And so it's not that there's no meat on those bones, but I just think that we have to, I suppose, take some chances. But we also have to find new income streams. Let me come to those, okay? I stopped short of those at an earlier time. The city needs more than one new income stream. I'm in favor of a marijuana dispensary for number one, okay? It's very hard to say exactly how much that's going to add. That certainly is not going to solve our poor city problem, but it's a step in that direction. I mean, marijuana is legal. Marijuana is regulated by the state. Certainly there's some issues with doing local regulation, and there's some issues with the growing part of it. You know, I don't think the sale is a big issue, except in, well, let me start over here. I think that the growing of the marijuana, there are some issues there in terms of not fouling the watershed and people not liking the smell, and that is the most difficult part of the city regulating the business in town. But as far as the taxation. We're gonna make some money off the taxation. Again, different people estimate different amounts. Certainly, no one's estimating that's gonna solve all our budgetary problems. And then, but the dispensary, I think the dispensary is, where we're gonna earn some tax money. Enough on that. Second thing, the fairgrounds. I think we have to make more than $1 a year rent from the fairgrounds. I'm not wed to any specific project there, but I'm not suggesting we get rid of the Sonoma Marin Fair, but I would suggest that fair can exist comfortably on about half of the land, and that we can the city can find ways to utilize the other half of the land to make more income. Some people want to put a convention center there. Some want to move the city offices there. I've already told you how important housing is to me, and I'd like that to figure in. One thing in terms of putting the city offices there, if I could talk about that for a minute, is that I certainly see the upside to that, and having some new city offices. I'm not positive of this, but I think probably our city offices, like our police and fire departments, are not earthquake safe at this point, and probably do need to be replaced when we can replace them. But my concern with affordable housing, and with a significant chunk of affordable housing, is that there'll be a lot less NIMBY issues, not in my backyard, in some corner of the fairgrounds than there will be if we move the city offices, and now in the middle of residences on 4 sides, we're talking about a new housing development there. I think that will be harder to get past the local neighborhoods. I'm not saying we can't, but that's a concern of mine in that regard. Also, you brought up the public health issue. I'm concerned about what happens with the speedway in this regard, okay? I'm sure we're all aware, I'm sure you're aware, that we have several empty lots in town. They're empty because they've housed gas stations, leaking underground storage tanks. They're basically toxic areas that you may need to remove the top 3 feet of dirt.
At least.
In order to build something, okay? And I think that that's going to be the case with the speedway. In fact, it's hard to find, there aren't a lot of speedways around, so you can do controlled studies on them. But my reading indicates to me that just as a general estimate, that the toxic problems around a speedway is 10 times as much as a gas station, for the same number of years. I'm not saying close it down. Again, I would like to deal with all our problems. We haven't talked much about climate change. I know you want to talk about local problems, but climate change is everyone's problem. And I think that I'd like to deal with climate change by always considering that when we're dealing with the city's other problems. For example, if you're talking about traffic, and if you can get more people on bikes, people are more healthier from the exercise they're getting on the bikes, and they're polluting the air less, so you're dealing with climate change there in 2 ways. Similarly with the speedway, again, I don't think I'm going to have enough power to make any decision like this in real life, okay? But if you made me king for a day, I would try to arrange a situation where we say, okay, NASCAR is even considering going to electric cars at some point. And I'd like to see us, have a compromise with the speedway, perhaps, that where they gradually go to all electric races, their car races. And I don't know about a destruction derby with electric cars, but I think that the first year after this, they would have 1 electric car race, and the next year 2, and gradually they would all be electric. And so you'd make some impact on our climate problem, while at the same time dealing with that problem. The one thing I would not do is just move the speedway. I think if the speedway is going to stay, it should stay there, because by moving it and not going all electric, you're going to have eventually 2 different sort of toxic sites as opposed to just 1.
I think Indy car racing, I just found out, is trying to do an electric hybrid league. It even has a name, and I can't remember what it's called. But I'm pretty sure it's Indy that they're talking about.
I think everyone on, because I know I read it about NASCAR. Not that it's going to happen next year, but they're talking about it.
Yeah, definitely. So we are getting near the endish of time. So is there anything that you missed? Let me see if there's anything else on here. You did talk about the budget, and I know a concern. Well, I would say it was a concern, but it was interesting to me that the city manager is retiring, and I think a lot of people weren't quite expecting that. So I'm curious to know if you have any. I don't really know much about the city manager.
Yeah.
I can, admittedly, I don't. It's not.
I see him every month or two, mostly in Petaluma Market, and so I don't know him well. I say hello. I don't know anything about that. He seems a little young to retire, but people said that about me too when I retired. So, I think it's a question of how much money you've been able to save and how many other things you want to do. I wouldn't be surprised if he takes another job somewhere, but I have no knowledge of that. He may have been the best city manager we could have had in terms of the belt tightening. I think he's been able to tighten the belt and put off our bankruptcy for like at least 6 months every year.
Well, and what do you want to see in a new city manager?
Yeah. I want to see someone who has some kind of track history of being creative and effective. Creative and creativity that works. I've had a lot of creativity in my life that didn't work. That I thought was creative and didn't work. Yes. So that's my first thing, and I'd like to pick someone that has some specific experience in the major problems we're dealing with. Okay, with affordable housing, someone that's been very successful with affordable housing, or someone that's been very successful with repurposing. I always like to say partial repurposing of our fairgrounds, okay? Or someone that's had good success with traffic, okay? Some of our bigger problems. I'd like to find someone, he or she, that has had success in that regard. What else? One other thing. This is just one of my. It's not that creative, but I intend to just bring up things that I've never seen done before. I like to see us let him know ahead of time that we want him to suggest a new income stream every month until we get one passed. I sort of cut myself off there with the fairgrounds. I talked about the marijuana dispensary. Talked about the fairgrounds. I'd like to also say, we're going to need some tax on top of that. I'd like to go first the temporary occupancy tax, okay? I like sales tax the least because I think it's the most regressive, but if we have to go there, we have to go there. I'd like to see us, honestly, I think where we need to go is some people like the term parcel tax, some like the term bond issue, a time-limited bond issue that's going to provide us money to do probably 3 things at once. Now, let me say this first, and I'll tell you that I have my own concerns about putting 3 issues together, but is to get some money for affordable housing, for the subsidies necessary for affordable housing, and to get some money for new police and fire buildings, and to get some money to balance the city budget, that we know is going under at this point in time. And I guess I skipped over one thing that you asked me about, which was why is the city in this spot? I mean, if you're going to say one thing, I think you have to say that it is the pensions promised to police and fire, some time ago. I don't blame them for that, I don't know, I get a pension from Kaiser. I'd be upset if someone tried to take it away. I have no intention of taking away those pensions. But of course also there's Prop 13, I think has had some effect on us, limiting the real estate tax on people. The commercial part of that is something we may be able to deal with at the state level and get some money back. I think the state's going to do something in the next 4 years to help cities like us, but I don't think that's going to be enough. I think we're going to have a new tax of some sort.
I would like to see a city manager that's a little business-minded myself.
Okay.
But you'll get all of that. I'll be broadcasting on election night, so you can catch all of my in-depth opinions.
Do you know
then.
anything about who they're interviewing?
I don't.
Okay.
I don't.
Yeah.
I don't know if the job description's been out yet because he's retiring in November.
Yeah.
So I'm not actually super into that process, but
Right.
I would like to get more involved because I want it to be. Because people ask me a lot of questions too.
If
So
I could
go ahead.
You got one more minute?
You got about 4.
Okay. I just wanted to bring up. I know you didn't want to. You wanted to stay away from national stuff. Okay. And although this Me Too movement is national, okay, it's also local at every level. We had the issue with our own high school graduation at Petaluma High School and such, and I kind of wrote a term paper on it as part of the, I don't know if you've run across it, as part of the campaign. And I just, I came up with two things that I thought were the most important is that, and I don't just mean city council people, I mean any male, I think, needs to work very hard so women are convinced that we're allies, that we're allies and that we will come to their aid if they need it. And more than that even, the biggest thing I think I've done to contribute to assault on women is being in groups of men where I was not happy with what was being said, but I did not call people out on it, even when there were no women there, okay? When there's a woman there, I think it's a little easier to call someone out on something that, but when there's no women there, I think that's one of the biggest things we men do that keep this type of talk and action going. And so I think, this is just part of, it's similar to the diversity or to the East-West, but I think as a society and even as a council that we can do a lot of modeling of how women should be treated. That's all I wanted to say.
Well, and if there's, I don't know if you wanted to expand on that, because we do only have 2 female representatives on the city council, which is not always controllable. There's only 1 woman running for council this go around.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you talked about being allies, but how is it possible to then represent not only women, but people of color or lower socioeconomic statuses while you are on council? Because
Sure.
that doesn't happen always in government at all levels.
And it would be a little easier if we went to district elections, I think if we don't do it, it seems to me we're going to get sued and have to do it, based on court decisions that have been made. I don't see, we can stay the way we are until we're sued, and then we will have to institute district elections. Maybe we're not big enough that anyone will sue us quite yet. So I think district elections have a lot of good stuff. You don't have to spend as much to campaign. You don't have to reach as many people. Some people who are against it, though, say that that's also the bad part about it, is it doesn't take much for one corporation or one rich person to buy everyone off in a small district. I have mixed feelings about that, but I think anything we can do to get more, it's still getting people to run, even if it's district, because the amount of work is the same, the pay is the same, $5 a meeting, with our current budgetary state, there's no way to talk about paying people more, to take that office. I don't think we have to we have to balance the budget over the long term first before we can think about something like that. I think we have to, it's a serious situation. We have, all the council people on this council are going to have to spend a significant amount of time going from person to person and explaining to people why we have to develop sources of revenue. And as much as we all hate to pay out tax money, I just think, one of my slogans I like is we all do better when we all do better. And we've talked some about public health, and I know the studies that show that when there is a bigger difference between the top 10% and the bottom 10%, that even this top 10% is less healthy than they are if there's less spread.
All right, so do you have maybe a 60-second closing remark you'd like to make before we got to take off here?
Yeah, let me just see some notes I have on that. Well, I think as this campaign has gone on, that all the council people, and I'm not saying that I shouldn't be included in that either, our platforms have come closer and closer together, less spread in the platforms. And when that happens, I would suggest that people need to vote their values, that they need to pick someone who shares the values that they consider most important. And that by doing that, that gives them the best assurance that when new things come up that we don't know about now for them to vote on, they'll vote in the way that those people would have wanted their council person to vote. And so I just want to say that my values are honesty, fairness, equity, respect, and transparency, and I promise to bring those values to every council vote and decision.
All right, thank you so much, Dr. Pocekay, again running for City Council in Petaluma. You are tuning in to State of the Union with DG the 30-something. The next show is not on the 16th, but the following Tuesday, which I believe is the 23rd. I usually have that in front of me. And we will be talking to Delinda Fisher. So you are listening to KPCA LP, Petaluma, California, 103.3.